morning, good evening, good late night, early morning, depending on where you are in the world. We usually talk about the things that are most likely to disable or kill us. Cardiovascular disease. There are other things that can do that, but we focus on the cardiovascular disease, and there's just so much there. Wanted to the major thing that we do is we talk about science and the evidence. I played the role as a scientist at Johns Hopkins, an epidemiology professional and a physician, of course. And I like to go in and bring out what evidence is reliable, what isn't, help give folks an understanding of the evidence in this space. But it's really fun, and it really makes a difference when a patient comes on and talks about what happens. Because as we'll discuss today with Lois, there's one thing knowing evidence, but when we make a decision, a life or death decision, quite often it's the emotion, it's family issues, it's fear, it's a whole bunch of other things get wrapped up in those decisions. And she and I were laughing about it. I was saying, she was saying, I'm not sure I would have had this procedure, but, and then we talked for a few minutes, and I said, I keep talking about how I would not have a stress test or an angiogram. At the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised finding me doing that, just out of curiosity and fear. So again, there's a lot of discussion to be had about the emotional side. Lois has been on before and talked about that. She is a lean mass hyperresponder. She shared that. She also shared that she has one of the common hemoglobinopathies, which became a big issue as she got into her surgical procedure, her bypass. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Now, we had originally planned a discussion where we would talk about the challenges of a patient juggling the multiple risk factors associated with cardiovascular disease, lean mass hyperresponder, and the fact that the medical community is not very aware of it. That being just one of many significant risk factors. Cardiovascular disease is a clear multifactorial risk situation. The second topic we were planning to discuss today, in this order, was managing healthcare folks and also family, because you may have one perception, the healthcare professionals, cardiologists may have a totally different perspective. And usually when you're in these scenarios, family's there too. So then you got a lot of stuff to juggle. And guess what? You may be having to make a life or death or a very important decision in the midst of juggling all of that. That is a major challenge. Lois touched on those when she joined us the first time, but we didn't get very deep. We didn't have enough time because there was just so much to her story. So we got so many positive comments, so much positive feedback. We said, you know what? Why don't we dive a little deeper in some of these issues? Because again, at the end of the day, that's what this channel is all about, helping us get through some challenging situations, prevent them in the first place, and talk about what they're like once that we get there. Now, the third thing we were going to cover with Lois today, the third topic was, it sounds like the meaning of life. And that sounds a little bit ethereal, but no, again, once Lois got on the table, there were some things associated with her procedure and her surgery that became far more serious than was expected. She actually found out some more. She went back over the past couple of weeks and read some of the surgical op notes and found out that it was actually far more serious than even she had known a few months ago when all this happened. So it really does make you start thinking about the meaning of life. One of the quotes in our preparatory discussion today, she said, "Look, I used to be, you spend your whole life or a lot of your life running from and saying, I'm afraid of what's going to happen at death. All of us do. That's the typical human condition. But then once you get there, there's a little bit more of a nothing. And once you've seen that, maybe that's not so scary after all." So again, I'm sure I'm not doing the discussion justice. That's why we've got Lois here today. So before we do, just some quick review of other content that you can get from the channel, other things you can access from us. Previous topics, for example, additional benefits of the new diabetic drug classes, the SGLT2s, the GLP-1s, both of them continue to show they're both developed and have been prevalent in the market long enough to where they're continuing to show very, very positive impact on the CVOT trials. If you don't know what CVOT means, it means cardiovascular outcome trials. You see that we've learned in looking at drugs and drug classes for diabetes, it's not whether or not they cure the diabetes or prevent further diabetes. What's very important is whether they prevent cardiovascular outcomes. So diabetes drugs now are really focused more on cardiovascular outcomes. That's why they're called CVOT trials. These two drug classes are just knocking it out of the park in that area. They're both expensive, like new drug classes are when they come out. But, that gets into some political and economic discussions that we don't really touch on that much in this channel, but we do want to make sure that folks are aware of what's going on in terms of developments. We've talked about the effects of intermittent fasting on aging and cardiovascular disease, injuries, discipline, sleep. Dana Stewart shared her patient story as well. And again, there's other things like, the key things that you don't get, there's science, there's surveys, there's research done, understanding what your typical primary care doctor does understand about prediabetes, diabetes, cardiovascular inflammation, plaque evaluation, and it's disappointing. Groups like research teams at Hopkins and Mayo have demonstrated that 2/3 of primary care docs, even in the United States, don't really understand how to diagnose prediabetes, which is the root cause, the biggest root cause for most of these cardiovascular problems. Now, if they don't know how to diagnose it, how can they know how to manage it? Unfortunately, that's why most of us, baby boomers, for example, probably have prediabetes, at least maybe diabetes. And 90% of us that have it don't know it. So there's stuff you just have to learn if you want to be a patient protecting your own health. And that's what we do. You can get most of these courses for free or by joining the membership. We have a new membership program for YouTube. We've always had Patreon. We've also developed recently a membership through Locals. And again, just there are easy ways to get this kind of information. And with that kind of information, yes, you can then start talking with your doc and making sure that you get the right kind of care. As I mentioned, we've got the YouTube channel, Locals, and Rumble now. The monthly subscription plans, something we started a couple of years ago. It's been the most popular way of seeing me as a physician. We have the Alabama Project. Again, we feel sort of like the dog that caught the bus. It is. We originally started with a plan to have a half-time remote clinic down there, and what it's turned into is 6 full-time on-site clinics and a lot more demand and growth. So a lot going on there. A lot of our content we've covered in the Prevention Myths book, but there's still more more to come. But you find out things like cardiovascular inflammation. What is that, and what does that mean? And you find out how you should really evaluate plaque, and why something like a stress test. Let's do a stress test, doc. Why a stress test is not that good. It's not going to predict your heart attack and stroke. Now, speaking of heart attacks and strokes, if you say the word mRNA or mention the company name Moderna, that's automatically a politically charged topic. And, if I had put something like vaccines in the title, we would probably get a bunch of folks come on board and dogpile the channel, try to decrease, try to interfere with the content delivery. That's not what this is. But think about this. Moderna has announced a positive data from a phase 2 trial. They're studying mRNA, that same technology that they've used for the COVID vaccine. And they're using it to develop, it's a VEG-A, it's a bioindicator, a system, a mechanism for the body to grow vessels. Now, what does all this mean? So you get a bypass, and Lois will be talking about her bypass in a few minutes. You get a bypass, and basically most of the time they're taking either an artery or often a vein and reattaching it to do a detour around the blockage. Well, especially if it's a vein, with both of them, you have to have a healthy artery at the end of all this in order to provide that blood supply. Well, that's what they're doing. They're using, it was called an Epicure study, and they're using the mRNA technology to improve the efficiency and the outcomes of reanastomosis. Pardon me, I'm going into the technical terms. The outcomes of an angiogram or a bypass procedure. So after I butchered that up, let's go into the transition and start talking with Lois about what's it like to be a patient who goes through a lot of cardiovascular prevention and treatment, including a bypass experience. So Lois, Janice and my wife noticed that you were on the channel today, and she made a comment. She said, "That's great. Lois is such a great speaker." And she said, "It's because she's a teacher." As you know, Janice has a lot of teachers in her family. Everybody in her family of origin are teachers, and she's got a doctorate in teaching as well. So I've already demonstrated I come from a family of non-teachers in the Deep South, and not the greatest verbal skills, but we muddled through. Now let's go back and talk a little bit about your experiences. You and I were just talking about it before the show today. You found out some new information over the past couple of weeks that maybe changed your perception a little bit. You want to share that with us?
I will. So just a quick summary. I had a bypass in August of 21, and that all of that was traumatic, to say the least, because it all happened so quickly, totally unexpected. For me, I never had that in my vision of anything, because I considered myself to be stable at that time. And I still do think that I was, but it's just, you find yourself in situations where you do have to make some decisions, whether that's no action or action. So you have to do that sometimes. And I was in that situation. So doing the surgery, I did run into complications that were dire. But even leading up to that, I had situations that were just like jaw-dropping to me, that just shattered my confidence going into the surgery. Even something similar, like who's going to do the surgery? You're situated. Someone tells you, hey, you got to go to the ER right now. They're going to admit you right now. You can't go home. And you don't know any of these doctors. You don't know anything about them, so you and your family are trying to find out who, what, did you go to med school? Did you graduate? Are you certified, board certified? Who are you? So they had assigned a physician to do the surgery, and we had just thoroughly, as much as we could for 2 days, felt pretty comfortable. And after meeting him, I felt comfortable, and we're good. And then the night of the surgery, this new physician walked in and said he was going to do the surgery. And I'm like, what? I was dumbfounded, but I was trying to hesitate and say, well, wait a minute, what's happening here? I'm all scrubbed up, ready to go. All of my little pre-surgery stuff had been done. And I knew that I couldn't tell my family that the doctor had changed, because they had already vested this other surgeon. And having a surgeon, that's the person that's there. That's your lifeline at that point. He's the one. So you want to have confidence in that person. And at that moment, I didn't know this guy. I'm thinking, I don't know this guy. So
Could I interrupt and clarify a couple of things? So mom's going into surgery. It's for her heart. It's a bypass surgery. We're all scared to death. Yes. And some of us have mixed emotions about it, but we agree we're going there. We meet the surgeon. We feel a lot more comfortable. We take a lot of time to vet, look him up, look up potential malpractice, look up this, look up that, what he's done. And so everybody's finally agreed. Then the night before surgery, in walks this new guy that you've never met. And he says, by the way, I'm doing your surgery now. Did they give you a reason for why the switch?
Something about the scheduling.
Oh, Lord. So your perspective was, my family's so emotionally on edge about this, I don't think I can even tell them.
I didn't. Yes, I didn't tell them. Even though I was a little nervous, I truly was. I did as much as I could do within that short period of time to see, at least to read his bio. And so I thought, I have to be okay with myself on this. I have to know, I have to put trust. If I'm going to have this surgery, I can't go in there afraid. I have to put trust that, he will do what needs to be done. He's on staff here. He's credentialed. So I'm just going to have that faith that he'll do his best. And he did. So
the sports analogies are always very popular, especially the football analogy. And there's a football analogy called field calls or field audibles. And basically what it's talking about is we had this play set up. Something just happened. Everything changed. We have to make a decision and go another route. And you're way deep into the middle of that.
Yes.
But the decision you just had to change was far more important than the next football play.
That's right. But it was, so I went ahead and did that. And then, of course, got into trouble during surgery. But, even before that, I thought, okay, so why did all of this happen? I'm always thinking, well, why did all of this happen? Why did this surgeon change? Well, he was like old school. this surgeon was.
What's that mean?
That means he had a whole lot of experience, boatload. He had been around for a long time. And he actually knew about my G6PD. I mean, he understood what that was, because most of the time when I mention it, it's just a blank stare, because it's not something that anybody actually knows. They may be vaguely familiar with it, but they don't know much about it. It's, but he wasn't. Yeah, go ahead, doctor.
So you're bringing up 2 or 3 points that make me want to set a little bit of a stage for folks. A lot of folks may be saying, well, wait a minute, this is a channel where we continue to talk about the evidence of why a bypass doesn't prevent a heart attack. And, why are we talking about this, a bypass? So we'll get to a little bit more detail around that. We'll also, you mentioned G6PD, and we also talked about how the surgery, this is a tough surgery, but it doesn't usually end up where yours did. And a lot of that was because of the G6PD. So let me step back and create a little bit of context and setting for folks that are asking some of those questions. So as I mentioned, Lois is a lean mass hyperresponder. So docs were confused about her cholesterol. The LDL stayed in the 120 range or less up until you went low carb. Then you got, what did it get up to?
Close to 300.
Close to 3, so it's like, oh my Lord. And so family gets involved. They're aware of it. The docs are involved. And it's sort of like, they really, 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 the docs are talking about how scary this is to family members. I've got family members saying, will you please just get an angiogram? And it's not going to hurt you. So, I can see myself doing exactly what you did, despite knowing that it sort of takes you down that slippery slope. You got the angiogram. Yeah. The docs turn around and the family members there, and the docs are going, you've got major problems. You need to don't leave the hospital. Don't pass go. You need to have a bypass now. And so then you found yourself in that, again, major field audible position of a whole bunch of things just changed real fast. I remember you calling me. And you're not the first. As I said, Lois, let me just say, I get these kind of calls a lot where patients will say, Doc, I know the evidence, and you talk about don't get a bypass, don't get a bypass. I don't say don't get a bypass. That's clearly what comes out of the discussion. But what I share is the science. And the science has become clear. I mean, you and I both know that, and we talked about it, that the science is becoming clearer and clearer. Stents don't prevent a heart attack. Bypass doesn't prevent a heart attack. But that doesn't mean that people don't get those. And that doesn't mean that, that there's not good reason to. You have to weigh your own values. You have to weigh where you are as a person. You have to weigh several things. And so I'll get this call and I'll have this discussion. And one of the things I'll say is, the biggest risk usually for a stent is not the procedure. It's the mistaken assumption that the stent's gonna fix your problem and you don't have to worry about lifestyle. Lifestyle is what's gonna fix it, not procedures. Now, you could also say that about a bypass graft. The vast majority of the times, bypass is a much deeper, much more a bigger procedure than a stent for sure. But still, the biggest risk for most bypasses is that people get off of their lifestyle, this whole process of going into the hospital giving you whatever food they're going to give you, nobody else understanding some of the lifestyle issues, getting pulled out of your lifestyle and again, starting to forget about all that. That's still the biggest risk for the vast majority of bypass grafts. But then the other thing comes into play, your G6PD. It stands for glucose 6-phosphate deficiency, and it's a metabolic issue, genetic, and a lot of people have it. You have it.
Yeah.
Here was the problem. Once you get into a surgical procedure, sometimes people with G6PD get very fragile red blood cells. And that's what happened with you. Your red blood cells just started collapsing. And oh my gosh. And so now I've created a little bit of context, and I think maybe it'll help explain some of what you told me a few minutes ago before the meeting, what happened.
Yes. So since he totally didn't expect to have any issues with that. He did not. But I did mention that to him, not with anything related to the surgery, but just for some medication that I was taking. So I was trying to clarify that I still needed to continue this med, prior to surgery, because it was sort of contraindicated with the G6PD. So once we had that conversation, he was made aware that, that I did have that, but he didn't think that was an issue at all. But once we got into the surgery, and once they just had problems from the start, it took them a long time to find good veins. I have tiny veins. So it wasn't that they weren't good veins, they were just tiny. So they had to try to find some that were appropriate size. So they took them a little bit longer than they wanted. And then after they finally did that, once they put me on the bypass machine, they had barely started the surgery when I started having problems. So it's like, what do? You can't stop because you're already into the surgery. So they had to finish. And so it was just turmoil for them, I'm sure, the whole time. But since he was aware of the fact that I had this, it didn't take them all that time trying to figure out why I kept losing blood. He already pretty much knew what was happening. It wasn't much they could do except just give me, try to keep me stable so they could finish the surgery. Because that's the answer.
They were giving you a lot of blood during the procedure, right? To replace the blood that was.
Yes. 20 plus
20 something units.
Yeah. Plus different blood products too, that they were pumping in. And so they couldn't give me any more. It was like, well, you can't keep pumping this in. I was already on fluid overload. But I still, all of this, I didn't, you're under anesthesia. You don't know all this is going on. So you're oblivious to it. Only your family and your friends that get updates from the surgery suite know that what's happening. But we got through that. And so direct me, because I don't want to go too much off target here.
Well, speaking of which, so they sent somebody out to talk to the family in the middle of the procedure.
Yes.
And it was one of those messages. I'll just give some context on that. If you read the books about Denton Cooley, who was, one of the original two big thoracic surgeons for heart transplants, when patients were going downhill, they would send somebody out, and often the patient will have died. And they won't go say that to the family. They'll go out and say, this was 20 years ago. They wouldn't do that. I don't think many groups would do that these days, but they were trying to manage the message. And you read the books, and it's pretty clear that's what they did. They would, after the patient died, they'd send somebody out to say to the family, things are not going well. We're going to come back, and we're going to do everything we can, but you need to be warned. And your family got that kind of a message.
They did. And of course, again, you're oblivious to all of this. And so they got that message. And then afterwards, they still got the message that even though the surgery was done, that it was still dire. They didn't know if, it was touch and go. They weren't stabilizing I wasn't stabilizing as quickly as they had hoped. And so it was just like wait and see type thing. But even all of this, I was totally unaware of it. Because they still had me on the vent. I think I stayed for a day longer than most patients. They come off pretty quickly, but I was on still for about 2 days, I think. But here I am. So, you know,
You made it, didn't you?
yeah, but the body is wonderful.
It
And,
really
and
is.
if there is no other message I can say, is that our bodies are just, I'm in awe of my body right now. I'm in awe of my heart, and I'll get emotional because we should just revere it, our bodies and our hearts, our kidneys, our lungs. All of these things come together as one, and they work all the time, 24/7, trying to balance, keep our bodies in balance, equilibrium. And and so I came to the point where I thought, okay, so all of these years, my body has been trying to do that, and it's got me to 70 here. And it has done a slamming job considering all of the junk, the harm, that we put in its way. It still managed to get me to this point. And and the biggest thing, like I had an echo, and I was looking at the screen and I saw my little heart muscle, and I almost had like a spiritual experience watching it because it's beat, 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 beat. And it does that. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And then I found out, so all of this blockage that I had in my heart, guess what? New opportunities developed so that the heart could still supply oxygen and blood to the rest of my body. It didn't stop. So it still found a way to do what it was created to do. And so I made a decision. I'm going to help it as much as I possibly can. I get out of its way and let it do its work. And so, if nothing else, all of this lifestyle changing and everything, I think it's it's a very powerful message. And yeah, I went through a lot with that surgery. Um,
You bring up a good point. The human body that we have is just an
it's incredible.
incredible organism, machine, whatever analogy you want to use. And in terms of those analogies, it's unfortunate that we tend to not have much of an owner's manual. And that's what part of this channel is about, is helping people understand a little bit more of the preventive side of maintenance rather than having to go to the repair shop.
That's right. And unfortunately, the audience that could benefit the most are the audience that we still have to try to get on board, because we, like in my case, I've always tried to live a sort of a healthy lifestyle, except some of the information. But that was the information that was available at the time. Maybe there was something nefarious. I don't get into all of that, but that was the information that we had available at the time. So you do that. And just like the information we have available now for us, we do that. I think if we just listen to our bodies, if you feel good, do what's reasonable for yourself. It sort of tells you just have to get in tune with your body when you don't feel well. And even when you feel well, I mean, we know sometimes what we're doing is not the best things. So you don't have to wait for someone to tell you, stop smoking, or that sugar is not good for you. Or, I mean, these things are pretty evident. So, but to have the support of a group and a channel like Dr. Brewer and a doctor like Dr. Brewer, because he's a team member. He's like on your team. And so, and he's also like your little cheerleader when you need it. And so it's just been great. And even though I did go through this time, and I did come out on the other side of it, and I fussed and kicked for the first 6 months after the surgery because I felt worse after the surgery than I did before. And that is not an understatement. Uh,
How so?
I my ejection fraction was totally above normal before surgery, and then after surgery, I was almost in heart failure.
Wow.
And I
So
had
significant decrease in perfusion to your heart.
yes, and
Mm.
had all kind of lung difficulties, and that's a common thing too when you have uh, fluid affusion, I think it's called perfusion,
Perfusion. That and
perfusion
perfusion just means how much
fluid.
blood is getting into the heart muscle
Yeah,
itself.
and so I had all of that, but I totally knowing what I went through doing that with all the loss of blood and everything, I do understand that that hemodynamically, I was not in a good place. So, of course, the outcome at the initial onset wasn't going to be as great as someone else that didn't go through that.
Right.
So, all of that intellectually, knowing it did not help me to have a good mental state because I did. I was depressed afterwards. I didn't speak much about it, not depressed from I'm going to die perspective, but that I might live and I have all of this for the rest, feeling bad, uh, still having tightness in my chest, couldn't touch my chest because it was so highly sensitive to touch, still is a little bit. So just, I was on that pity pot for quite a while. Uh, yeah, I was there for a good bit. And that's totally sort of out of my character. But I just gave into it. I thought, okay, go ahead and weep and moan and grieve and then see where you're gonna be after that. And I did. I did all that. And today the sun is shining. So I'm good with that. But it was a long process, and then in your family too, they're caring for you, and they see you not being the person you were, and they're just afraid every day
Yeah.
that you're going to make that turn.
You mentioned when we were talking about the emotional experience that it's part of the human condition that humans spend a large part of their life running from death.
Yes.
And one of the things we didn't mention, though, is that family members spend a large part of their life running from mom's death.
That's right.
So you got a lot more than just your own emotions to deal with, to juggle here.
That's right. Since I don't know if I took you to the depth too soon, but of course, I was, raised traditionally in the deep South, and from a very religious family, and of course, very fundamental beliefs, hell, fire, damnation, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when you're little, you can't really, you don't really grasp that. Even though I was sort of like the thinker, I sort of hid it from my family that I didn't believe that at all. But when you're, and if any of you are listening to this later, I love you all. But anyway, it's like I just never actually believed it, even when I was a little kid. But on the off chance that I could find myself in hell or whatever, I wanted to maintain just a little belief in it, just enough so that if I met him and he asked me, I would be able to say, yeah, I believed in it, even if it was just a little bit. I am a spiritual person. Let me just say that. But for its doctrine and all of that, my doctrine was, it developed in a different way. But that little thread controlled me always in everything I did. And I can remember trying to fool God when I was, my idea of that when I was little, because they would say, oh, you don't know when you're going to die. And then I would say, well, then I'm just going to know I'm going to die today. And that way, if I know I'm going to die today, I'm not going to die today. And I thought that was so fine thinking, right? So each night I'd say my little prayers. Then I said, oh, I know I'm going to die tonight. So, and then I chuckle to myself, yeah, so that means I'm going to be alive tomorrow. So then I wake up alive and I'm thinking, see, told you. And so I would do this until, of course, that was when I was smaller. And then, of course, I stopped doing that later. But that little thread still lingered. And, I don't know about we all, but I sort of had a sense of immortality, a feeling of immortality for myself. Everybody else may die, but if I did, it would be so far off into the future, it's insignificant for me to even think about it. So, but that little fear sort of lingered. And so it altered my choices. So I was very conservative. I wouldn't do anything like I considered dangerous or not too adventuresome. That's not my personality. I hated to fly. That was like the most petrifying thing, but I did it for like 12 years constantly. But it was rough. But when my mom passed away, my sense of immortality slipped a little bit because my mom passed away. And I thought, okay, if my mom, which is my thread, if that thread is cut, then it's real. It's real. But then after this surgery, when I went into the surgery, I wasn't thinking so much about dying or death. Now that I look back on it, which is really strange, I didn't think about it until afterwards. It was like I was in a state of shock, honestly. I truly, I was numb when going through this. But once I woke up, I still didn't think about, I just felt really badly for several days. So, but I still didn't think about dying. It just never really, I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it in the hospital much. I just felt like I would be okay. But then once I got home, that's when I started thinking about it. It was this sense, I've got this sense of, it was weird, a weird feeling that something really significant had happened. I felt this shift in me. And I wasn't quite sure what that shift was. But then I was working on it because I think we had a conversation before I actually read my records. Yeah. And I just said, I have a sense of peace now. I'm okay. I'm not running towards the gates, but I have a sense of peace that I don't have to be afraid of what it is afterwards. And my greatest fear was not that I would go to heaven or not that I would go to hell, but that there was nothing. Nothing. So that nothing, it would just overwhelm me, this overwhelming feeling like, oh. So after I woke up and I realized that I didn't know anything that happened from the time I went to sleep until several days later. And it just dawned on me that if I had never awakened, it would have been okay. I mean, I wasn't going to miss anything. I wasn't going to miss not going somewhere, not doing anything, not loving anybody. I wasn't going to miss anything. My family would be the ones that would have the memories and missing and all of that. But me, I won't miss a thing.
So you went through a transition from saying nothing is the worst thing, and then maybe experienced a little bit of nothingness and said,
nothingness. Yes,
it's not as bad as I've been fearing.
No. I mean, it's nothing, right? Yeah. And so I was telling you earlier,
it from a deep sleep. What happened during the deep sleep? Yeah. Well, if you didn't dream, nothing.
nothing. And so you have that nothingness, and that nothingness is nothing. So you don't have an awareness of that either. So, I mean, I don't know how true that, I mean, I didn't have a near death experience. So all of this, I could just wake up shocked, but you know, it's okay too. It's like the important thing for me is that I'm able to say death and dying and not freak out about it. And of course, my whole attitude is that I want to live.
Yeah.
But when my heart, and because it has done a beautiful job, and it's going to continue to do what it can do until it can't do it any longer, whatever the reason is for it, whenever it stops, then I'll just say, job well done. And it's just awesome to be able to have had all of these more days. So I'm just grateful for that. And I'm not now looking or chasing the more days.
Yeah.
You just have to stop that. And each day that's given to you, you may have more, this may be your more day. And so, you know, you just have to embrace it and go with that. So it's sort of like changed my perspective of how I want to live, and, you know, want to have the good quality of life that I can have, but each day, simple pleasures, simple things. And yeah, it's awesome. It's an awesome sense of peace for me, and I'm grateful for it, for sure. Of course, I still can't talk too much about death. That's the other thing, not being able to actually talk about it fully
Your family.
to the family, because they don't want to hear it. Ah, you got 30 more years. I said, oh yeah, I could, but I want you to know that it's okay. I want you to understand that it's okay. And it's not, I'm not giving up at all. I'm going to continue to do the things that we talk about, to continue a good lifestyle, to help my body do what it knows to do best. And to stop concentrating on everything that's wrong. You know, it's like, okay, I got plaque, I got this, I got ApoE, I got GCPD, I got lupus, I got this. And so it's like, oh my God, well, what's good about your body? What has it done good? And so now I just label all of the wonderful things that it does every day, in spite of
All of those risks.
having all of that stuff, you
Yeah.
know.
You know, this was, especially the past few minutes, I think is a very, very helpful context for me and for our typical viewer and listeners, because here's the thing. As you mentioned, we get way deep into a lot of science, a lot of hard stuff, a lot of confusing stuff, and it takes time and effort. Now, there's something that's motivating 116,000 subscribers to spend time on that channel, wading through that detail and listening to some boy from the deep South who doesn't speak that well sometimes. It's a lot of effort, and there's no question. One of the key things fueling that effort, motivating that effort, is this fear of dying.
Yeah.
A fear of dying soon. And, you know, when you talk to somebody who, you may not have had a classic near-death experience the way they tend to be defined, but you clearly got close enough to where
Yes.
you've been there, you've come back, and you're saying, guys, it's not quite as scary as it seems.
No. I don't want to minimize that for anybody that may have to process this. This is just my journey and my thinking on it. And I'm not trying to take it lightly, but it's just a cycle, and not a punishment, it's just a cycle, a part of it. And it's not the why me, it's just a cycle, a part of the whole life experience. And so I just, it's difficult. And I'm not, this is how I'm feeling today. I don't know, maybe tomorrow I'll develop more fear. I don't know. But for today, I feel uh, peace around it. And I will still probably take that stud to get the 4 more days.
Well, I think for me, I think that's a good transition into Q&A. I've seen a few people asking a little bit more about what's going on with you. So I think if you could stay with me and you and I can take some questions.
Okay.
You ready for that?
Yes.
Okay. So if you'll give us the Q&A transition, Aspen. So Aspen, it looks like you and Gilbert did the handoff in the background. I'm impressed. So let's go to some of the comments. This is from Margaret D. Good morning. I'll miss today's live, but we'll catch the replay. I'll also send you a Facebook message, Dr. Brewer, about LP(a) with video. Very interesting research info. LP(a) affects up to 20% of people. Well, yeah. Any comments before I do?
Oh no, LP(a) is another one of those little check marks on there too. So
you're one of those people, huh?
Yeah.
How high did yours get?
Ooh, in the thousands.
Oh, really? I didn't remember it being that high.
Yeah, initially it was. I mean, it's come down, but it's still not like nowhere near where you would have liked it to be.
Yeah. So, Margaret, it's a great question. It's a great topic, again, for the viewers of this channel who like to go into details associated with specific cardiovascular risk factors. LP(a) it's what's called an apoprotein. There are 2 other apoproteins that we look at. One is ApoA1 and ApoB. Now, what's an apolipoprotein? So here's the thing. Cholesterol, whether it's the quote good cholesterol or quote bad cholesterol, and those are outdated terms, but there's still particles in your blood, and the cholesterol is the same. So why could you have 2 different kinds? It's the proteins that form the particles. So for example, and why do you have proteins that form particles? Here's why. Blood is over 95% water. If you eat a hamburger, or even if you eat a healthy salad with olive oil, what happens to oil when it mixes with water? It doesn't mix. It forms big blobs. So the body, those big blobs would cause a heart attack or stroke if there wasn't a mechanism for the body to make those fats or cholesterols or oils form tiny microscopic particles that won't create that blockage. Now, those are apolipoproteins. So, quote, good cholesterol or HDL is formed by the apolipoprotein ApoA1. LDL, which Lois has jumped up to 300 when she started watching her carbs, is formed by ApoB. Now, to get back to this question and this topic, there is a genetic variation of ApoB called LP(a). So LP(a) is just another LDL, except it has unique characteristics. When you look at it in terms of the structure of the molecule, it's got things that we call Kringle repeats, a little hook of protein that comes off of the particle itself. We used to think maybe that's that little hook that causes the increased inflammation associated with LP(a). But then as you get deeper, the science would indicate maybe it's something else. For some reason, LP(a) tends to have much more of an attraction to the small, dense, and oxidized LDL or cholesterol particles. So there's still a lot of stuff we don't know, but there are a few things that we do know. LP(a) can cause significant extra risk. And as Lois mentioned, in addition to lupus, G6PD, lean mass hyperresponder, which may or may not be a risk.
Yeah.
She also had LP little a. So, the juggling match here. Lois had to be a great juggler. So now what do you do for it? Well, if you, or first of all, why haven't most people heard of it, including doctors? Why haven't most doctors not heard of it? Well, there's the assumption that you can't do anything about it. That's clearly the assumption in the United States, despite the fact that we do know that niacin for many people will greatly decrease LP little a.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there were some studies that were done that said, you know what, we gave niacin, it didn't really lower LP little a, or it doesn't lower it enough, and therefore it doesn't work. Well, the guy that the principal, I've got videos where I quoted the principal investigator of that study saying, we know it works. I'm really worried about the study that I just did because I'm very much afraid that it's going to be misinterpreted and people will not, using niacin for LP little a is going to go out of style in medicine. And that's exactly what happened. Now, it didn't in Europe. The European standards committees retained niacin in their treatment components. And that's one of the things that I'll discuss with patients who have this issue. Now, how about other things? Are there any new treatments? Yes, over the past year, past couple of years, there's a new type of a drug. It's called an antisense drug. And again, hate to get political by mentioning scientific issues, but if you think mRNA is a genetic technology, the antisense drugs are very, very similar in their mechanism. Those antisense drugs have knocked it out of the park in terms of the LP little a concentration, as in decreases of like 90%, huge decreases. Now, I've got several patients who were able to find out where studies were being done and actually get themselves included in a study. That doesn't mean that you're going to get the antisense drug. You might get the placebo. The antisense drugs are not available yet, unless I'm behind on that issue. But I do suspect maybe in our lifetime, and for sure in our next generation's lifetime, there will be some medications out there that have a much bigger impact than we've been able to have in the past. Again, if you start looking at other things to do for it, the head of cardiology at Mayo was quoted, his was sort of the standard quote, and that is, well, manage your other risk factors, which is true, and take a statin. Then there's argument about whether a statin actually works for this, and most of us would say no. And then you'd say, well, why would that doctor be saying take a statin? Because he's saying, well, the statin's going to manage the other risk factors. So, Margaret, you brought up a great point. You gave me a chance to go down one of these factual bunny holes, and I appreciate it. Anything to add, Lois?
I did take the niacin at 500 milligrams a day, and it actually did make a difference. I never took more than 500, so I don't know if it would have improved even more, but it actually did help.
You bring up a great point. The cardiologists in America, for the most part, the standard treatment is what, or the standard statement is, well, if you're going to use it, number one, we've found out it didn't work because of those trials, which I don't think is the correct interpretation, and just like the principal investigator. The other interpretation is, well, if you're going to use it, you got to use 2 grams or more. And I always keep saying, well, that's not true. If you're actually monitoring something other than LP little a, like cardiovascular inflammation and the other bioindicators, you can see very significant improvement. Mm-hmm. So classically, you won't see niacin knock 2/3 or half even. It's usually decreased the LP little a by about 30%.
Yeah.
But even with, and that's what happened with you. So, but even with that, if you're monitoring the other biomarkers like cardiovascular inflammation, you can often see very significant improvements. And again, I start seeing them a lot with patients at 500 milligrams, not the full 2 grams. So thank you again for sharing your experience. Fort Worth West Side. You said that if you had hard plaque, take the statin to control inflammation caused by the body trying to attack the plaque. Exactly what is the mechanism by which the statin does this? That's a great question. And the answer is we don't know. It's a great question and we don't know. And I wish I could give you more details around that, but I can't. What we do know, though, is there are ways to measure that inflammation. In your typical science studies on these, you'll see HSCRP. That stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is a protein that the liver makes in reaction to inflammation. But that's really only one test for cardiovascular inflammation. We typically will look at others, such as MPO, myeloperoxidase, LP, PLA2. Those are both enzymes that are made by the immune cells to attack that hard plaque. And so when we look at those, we get a clear indication of just how much inflammation, cardiovascular type inflammation, might or might not be happening. We get a great view of it from a study that docs tend to do outside of this space. It's called the microalbumin creatinine ratio. What that's looking at is whether or not our kidneys are spilling protein. Why would we be looking at that? So here's the thing. Each kidney has about 1 million filters. The filter membrane is simply the lining of the artery wall. And if the lining of the artery wall is spilling protein, we also know that it's likely to be spilling cholesterol, small dense LDL. It's not a problem. You make plenty of that protein. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for an indicator of injury to the lining of the artery wall. Because if the lining of the artery wall has that injury, which is what we call cardiovascular inflammation, it can be leaking that cholesterol into the muscle layer of that artery wall. And that is exactly what plaque is. So great topic. Thanks for bringing it up. Bart Robinson, good morning, Dr. Brewer and Lois, on the beach. And then he says, unfortunately, I thought he was rubbing it in. But then he said he had to go to the dentist, had a toothache. Sorry to hear about that. Amer Al-Gayer, good to hear from you, Amer. Amer is a frequent listener, frequent commenter. Bambi Gage, great. Good to hear from you. Bambi got us interested in talking about, I think it was vitamin K2 at one point in time. James, California, hopefully many of us will avoid this cardiovascular experience. I think you'd say a big amen to that, wouldn't you?
Yes, definitely.
I think many of us were listening to that thinking, I don't want to go there.
You don't.
Richard Militello, good morning, everyone. Bobby Ocampo lives in the Philippines. I don't know if he's an expat from somewhere else, but he often attends and gives us some good comments. And he's saying mabuhay, which I can't remember for sure. I think it means something like live long and prosper, or it's a greeting. Share and flood social media to help save lives. I think it means something like live long and prosper, or it's a greeting. Share and flood social media to help save lives. Oh, we have.
So that's this. We are live, right?
Yes, we are live.
That's this. We are live, right?
And as you can see, we've got about a 3 to 6 second delay. So that's what was going on there. Don't worry about it. It's happened before. Michael Sanders, good morning from Arizona. Bart Robinson, hit that like button. Thumbs up. Thanks for all you do. Thanks, James. Thomas Handyside gave us a super chat. It's that's 25 CA. I don't know what the CA is, but no matter which way you slice it, Tommy, I appreciate it. These contributions help us support our staff that do these productions, so people can develop an interest and listen easily to this content. Ada Reeves, good morning. Bob Bell, what hospital system did Lois use? I don't know if you want to tell that. I don't think I would either. Bobby Ocampo, if you don't recommend bypass because it does not prevent a heart attack, any medicine or cure that will aggressively remove inflammation markers besides low carb fasting, low dose statins? Well, that's the whole point. What you want to do is decrease that oxidative environment, which tends to start happening as we age and as we start getting insulin resistant, as we start gaining weight. All of these things are driving our body into more of an oxidative state. So high intensity interval training, minimizing body fat, dropping those carbs, keeping your glucose and insulin levels at a minimum like you were when you were young. All of those things are the things that really help us manage these cardiovascular risk factors. Bob Bell, switching docs at the last minute, ignoring the risks of G6PD. Well, it wasn't you that you were ignoring. I think what he's saying is that
yes, I get it, but I mean, there's always risk with surgery, and not everybody would have experienced the same thing. And I don't even think, even in all of the literature that you would read, you wouldn't come back with the idea that G6PD would have influenced the surgery to that. It's just that the bypass machine, my body saw that as such a stressor that it just, my red blood cells just started a process of hemolysis where they were just breaking down. But no one going into surgery thought that G6PD would even have played a part in it, because anything that you look up about this is only about different medications that you take, you shouldn't take because it could cause hemolysis. But no, I mean, if I could have had a nickel for every time he said that darn G6PD, I could be sitting on the beach too right now. But yeah, it was totally one of those things that just happened.
I would agree with you. It's, that was not a predictable thing, even though the presence of the G6PD was there. If you go back and you look at the experience and the evidence, it's not a predictable thing that you were going to have a problem. It just happened.
Yep.
And maybe that translation came, or it implied some of that the way I presented it. If so, I apologize. Fort Worth West Side. If you change lifestyle and knowing a stent won't prevent future heart attacks, MIs, in another artery, would it be a waste of time to correct a blockage that gives no symptoms? Not asking for specific advice. Well, that's the issue. We get into how much is it really going to help? And we cover a lot of that evidence. And, we talked about it today. We talk about it in a lot of other videos as well. And I think part of the major message for today is the patient side, the emotional side. Lois is talking about emotions, but as you can see, she is much, much more well-informed than the average patient in terms of every one of her risk factors, the lupus, the G6PD, the lean mass hyperresponder, all these things. Lois is not only is she a teacher, she's a major reader. I can tell you, I get patients like that can be a challenge for docs because quite often you'll get into discussions and you know more than the doc. So about your specific issue.
Yeah.
But so today we cover whether the evidence, the scientific evidence indicates that it helps in other presentations. today's discussion was, okay, understanding that it's questionable at best. How do you still make the decisions? And also understanding that decisions for these things are not just reading science, they're also juggling family emotions, juggling personal emotions, juggling a lot of stuff. So again, thank you so much for being so transparent and open about that. If there's anybody making it's sometimes easy to sit on the other side of this, this kind of show and say, I don't think I would have done that. They don't help. Well, I can tell you, I do this for a living. I get these calls all the time, despite the fact that people know that the science is just not there. So if you're thinking that you wouldn't do that if you were presented with the same thing, you might want to think again. Just make sure that you know that. I do have plenty of patients that say, nope, not going to do it. I'm not saying that's the standard response. I'm just saying it's a very, very common response. Steve Mitchell. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yes, please. I feel compelled. First of all, there's no shame involved in making that decision. And so you don't have to guilt yourself because you have this stance that you have made. And there is nobody that was any more hardcore, low carb, no statin. I mean, once I make up my mind to do something, I am like the poster child for that thing. And so for me to be sitting there at that moment, and I did, I felt like I had lost credibility. I'm the one, the cheerleader for, my family, my friends, low carb, do this, no sugar, no grains, no legumes, watch your diet, exercise. So, I'm the one. And so that's what everybody's, oh, Lois, she really did that. And so here I am just saying, there is no shame in you deciding to go ahead and do it, because at that moment, I sort of was letting that, well, what will everybody say? I'm the one that says, if you do all of this, then you won't have to have a bypass, or you won't have to have a stent, but yet here I am having one. And here I am taking a statin. But anyway, I'm just saying, we always will choose the path, for the most part, that goes towards life. And if someone is offering you that, even though at that moment you're not totally sure about it, well, maybe you'll never be totally sure about it, but it's okay to decide either way. It's okay to take the surgery. It's okay not to do the surgery. It's just, but no shame associated with it at all, whether you decide to do that. Thank you.
So thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, I have, it's a really good point. I will share with you and with the audience my first impressions of you. One of them was number one, a lot of risk factors. We've already covered that.
Yes.
Number two, very, very knowledgeable. And we've already talked about that. But one thing that I haven't said, and now that you've said it, my third impression was, this is a hard-headed woman.
Yes.
And a whole lot of that was, you sharing some of your experiences about the statin, and some of, all of the different docs that had said, no, you got to go on this statin. You got to go on a high, and not doing it. So people need to get the rest of the story when they start thinking about that. So good, really good point. Thank you for sharing. I think, again, it's helping a lot of folks. Bobby Ocampo, will a long fasting help immediately remove inflammation? Immediately, say 7 days or longer. Well, you'll start seeing improvement within just a few days, Bobby. That's a great question. And it's a lot bigger issue than just decreased calories. It's getting into some changes in our cellular metabolism, which decreases cardiovascular inflammation. A lot of these things get into a thing, if you haven't heard of it, called autophagy. Auto meaning self and phage meaning to eat. And basically what that's talking about is that when you get into fasting modes, your cells start recycling beat up old non-functioning organelles like mitochondria that can lie around and not be useful and actually create some bad actors and some bad bioindicators. So that autophagy process is a very, very healthy one to stimulate. Wayne H., what role does psoriatic issues play in the cardiovascular inflammation? Well, you know, again, it's sort of like everything they bring up. Well, Lois happens to have that. You don't really have psoriasis, but the lupus, yeah, the lupus is the same kind of thing. You want to speak to that?
Well, I was diagnosed back in my 30s, and any autoimmune psoriasis is an autoimmune condition. Sometimes they don't really know what actually caused these autoimmune, even though now they're coming back with good health and things like that that may be related. But it causes chronic inflammation, low grade. Sometimes you feel fine. It's not like you're having symptoms or things. I know with psoriasis you do, but with lupus, it's sort of an invisible type autoimmune. You can't see any outward manifestations of it unless you have, there's different types, unless you have the skin representation of lupus. But it's hard to control it. It is. I mean, you can take steroids, which I did, but if you take steroids is the #1 contributing factor towards atherosclerosis. So you put yourself in a situation where if you're on steroids, then you're gonna, increase your risk in that area. So it's just one of those things. I have found that the lifestyle changes that Dr. Brewer talks about, all of that does help eliminate or decrease some of that chronic inflammation. And that's pretty much all you can do, because they don't really have any like treatment that you want to take unless you have the severe form of these conditions, because what you have to take is causing you just as much harm, or maybe as much harm, as just going with the dietary changes and things like that may help. So, but that's it. Autoimmune is just one of those, your body is attacking its own healthy tissues and cells. And it's really, yeah, it can be pretty traumatic for you.
Very good point. And it's just like the doc talking about LP(a). It's a multifactorial issue. Anything you can do with the big ones, like we talked about, lifestyle helps with all of these. Wayne H., already all but eliminated carbs, exercise, immediately fast with maybe OMAD, 1 meal a day, or up to 4-hour eating window. So very good. Fort Worth West Side is saying, once you really understand the causes, you begin to think people are loading up their carts in the grocery store with a deadly material. Very, very true. I'm going to have to move on, but we'll cover a couple of quick comments that I wanted to touch on. J. Mark's saying, should you stay on atorvastatin for life, or should you change meds occasionally? I do use statins. It's only for people that have plaque. I don't tend to use them just for LDL levels alone. And I tend to not use atorvastatin, and I tend to use very, very low doses. So check out one of my other videos about how to manage and select statins. Bobby Ocampo, hope there will be a hospital service on several days fasting with supervision of a medical practitioner. Yeah, I'm not holding my breath for that to happen. I'd like to see it, but yeah. What's the difference between LP(a), LDL particle size? I don't know the answer to that. That's a great question, but I don't know. I am going to have to move on. we've had a lot of interest, and again, you did a great job. I really enjoyed that story.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Any final comments before we go?
Out quickly so that you can wrap up. You don't have, what is it when they say, you don't have to be extreme. You don't have to, just be kind to yourself, enjoy life. Our bodies can manage a cookie every now and then. I mean, you don't have to do that. And there are people, each of us is an individual. There are people that will eat junk food their whole life and live just as long as anybody. So you have to live for yourself and do the things that's best for you, because you can't compare yourself to anyone else and how your outcome may be, or how it may be different or less. And get rid of what ifs, right? Yeah. Because it's in the past. So you go from where you are and you move forward. And I just say, enjoy each day. And yeah, that's it. And thanks for listening and participating.